Reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. To abolish the law or the prophets. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. This is the gospel of our Lord. Thanks be to God.
Have you ever encountered a worker who didn't do enough to earn their salary? I think probably everybody has a story in their mind or an example in their mind. I was thinking about this week, and I remembered many years ago, I started a new job along with, I think, maybe about 10 people. And we had to attend 1 week of orientation at this new job. And at the end of the week, one of the 10 people were fired. We didn't, of course, we're not told why they let that person go. We didn't really know for sure. But we had a pretty good idea because every day during orientation, all of it, almost all of it, like people would nudge her, she'd go right back to sleep. And the CEO came to talk to us one day, and she slept through the whole CEO's presentation, and we could not believe that she just would sleep through it. And it turned out that she had a pretty good excuse or pretty good reason for falling asleep on the job because she was still working her other job, which was mostly night shifts. So she was staying up all night, working, and then coming to orientation the next day. She was just exhausted through all of it. But still, we couldn't really fault the organization. We weren't surprised that they let her go because she still didn't do the job that they hired her to do that week, which was to learn her new job. You've probably heard this saying, it's not personal, it's business, right? When you hire someone to do a job, you expect them to do the job, and in turn, they expect to be compensated for the job in the way that you promised to compensate them. So a salaried worker's worth depends on their ability to compensation that they're receiving. Now, did you know that the word salary comes from the word salt? It does, and the reason is for thousands of years, salt has been an important source of income. It's a precious commodity, has been a very precious commodity for many years. Of course, it was an important preservative, a fertilizer, it was used in medicinal ways, also in religious rituals. And in the times of Jesus, salt was also used in clay ovens. So salt was very precious. A couple years ago, Todd and I got to visit what is the known oldest salt. We learned that until 1890, people could only get to that town called Hall. But because of the salt in that city, what they called white gold, that precious resource, that small town has been a major site of human activity for over 7,000 years. 7,000 years. That region, the region of the world, extremely wealthy for many years. And so we saw pictures of the emperor and the empress of Austria coming to visit the salt mine back in the day because it was an important resource for them. Salt then was a form of currency. Soldiers and government officials would get paid in salt, and people would trade things for salt too. So ancient settlements, they developed along salt trade roads. like the town of Jericho. And unfortunately, people would also trade other people for salt, slaves. They would trade slaves for salt. And this is where we get isn't worth their weight in salt. Ever heard that? I think sometimes we're tempted to think that if we do enough works of righteousness, that we will be worth our weight in salt for God. Or that the Christian life is kind of a business transaction. If I follow a set of rules, if I believe in certain ways, then I will have done my job, and in turn, I can expect to be compensated in terms of God's favor or God's blessing. I mean, isn't that what the people seem to be saying in that reading from Isaiah? We've been fasting, we've been following the rules, we're humbling ourselves, we're doing our part. Why aren't you taking notice? In other words, we're doing our believing that righteousness is following a set of rules, is that we can never actually follow them. Could. Even if we could be perfect in all the rules that we follow in achieving righteousness, there's a bigger problem with that proposition, which is that it's not enough. It's not enough to appear righteous, not enough to be perfect in a religious ritual or in a set of behaviors. Jesus says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So what kind of righteousness? I feel like there's been a lot of distractions, so let's just take a moment. Everybody's like, including me. So we're talking about that belief that if I do these things, if I believe this set of beliefs, if I follow this set of rules, then that means I'm righteous. And that means I'm doing my job and I'm going to be compensated. But there's a problem with that Jesus doesn't seem to be impressed by that. That's not how Jesus describes righteousness. Remember Jesus' parable about the workers in the vineyard. He once told this parable about an owner of a vineyard who goes out and he hires workers for the vineyard from morning till evening. And at the end of the day, the owner of the vineyard pays everybody the exact same amount. And the workers who were hired first complain. And when you hear that parable, we also are a little bit siding with the workers in the morning. You know, it offends our fair, because sometimes we tend to think of, we want fair compensation for work done. And if this is the way that things were, then there would be all this pressure to measure up to God's standard, to show ourselves valuable, to show that we are worth our weight in salt. But that's not how Jesus, again, describes the kingdom of heaven. So here we come to Jesus' words this morning in the Sermon of the Mount. Jesus says, "You, my followers, are the salt of the earth." He doesn't say, if you follow these set of rules, or if you achieve righteousness in this way that you understand righteousness, you will be awarded handsomely like the soldiers are compensated. It doesn't say, if you do these things, you will be worth your weight in salt. He doesn't say that. He says, we're not the salaried workers, we are the salt. So that means we are the precious commodity. We are the white gold. Did I say in Hallstatt they called salt the white gold? Maybe I meant to say that. So when they were looking for salt in the salt mine, it was called the white gold. We are the white gold. We are the agents, the catalysts. We are of great value and a great resource to the world. This reminds me of a saying that I learned early in my healthcare chaplaincy career from Dame Cicely Saunders. It has always stayed with me. Cicely Saunders, she's the founder of the modern hospice movement. She was trained as a nurse, a social worker, and a physician. And she was also really active in the Anglican church. So she was almost a chaplain too. She was like the whole hospice team. And Cicely Saunders really changed the way that we care about people who are dying. One of the things that she did, she founded the first hospice in 1967 in London. And one of the things she did was she gave dying people pain medicine on a schedule instead of waiting for people to earn their medicine, as she said it, by being in pain. And this was unprecedented. It made a big difference. And that's still a lot how hospice and dying care is done now. But one of the things that she said that really stayed with me is this. She said, all of the advances in pharmacology, all these new technologies that we have, they're not the whole story. She said, we are the medicine. We are the medicine. In other words, yes, those medical interventions are important, but just as who they are and that relationship to the patient. In other words, it's not business. It's personal. It's personal. Now, you may feel you have little to offer the world because you don't have a perfectly holy life, or perhaps you don't feel very worthy because you don't have a lot of knowledge or theological background. Maybe you believe you have nothing to offer because you don't have millions of social media followers, you're not an influencer. But the word of Jesus to us, the word of Jesus to you, is that you are an indispensable, precious resource to the world. As Jefferson reminded us last week, God likes to operate in and through the lowly and the small anyway. And it's not your work that God is interested in, but you yourself, you are the medicine. Now, does that mean that our good works don't matter? No, what it means is that we don't practice righteousness or good works for a salary. We practice righteousness as an expression of who we are and as an evidence of God's transformation in our lives. There's freedom in that because our worth isn't attached to our works. And it means that God is able to do far more with and through us because we aren't tied to a business transaction or structure. It's not business, it's personal. So what I want you to hear this morning is just like the world needs salt and light, the world needs you. Your unique heart given to God in service of the world. As Lindsay said this morning, what would be the use of salt that's never tasted? Well, maybe she said the light. What would be the use of salt if it's never tasted? What would be the use of light if it's hidden under a bushel basket? Righteousness isn't about doing pious things inside our sanctuary walls or for our own ends. And we do no favors to anyone when we hide ourselves from the world, when we refuse to live our transformed, God-given lives out in the world. We do the world no favors when we use our faith as a means to our own comfort. Salt that's not used or tasted is useless. Light that is hidden is useless. But when given in service to the world, they're precious, they're valued, they're necessary. The prophet Isaiah said, "You fast only to fight, to strike with a wicked fist for your own interest. And the fast I have chosen is not just to humble yourself for your own sake, but to be out in the world, to be interacting with people, caring for them, sharing food with the hungry, sharing your life with them." Jesus said, "Let your light shine before others. Don't hide under a bushel basket." Now, since the 1800s, Protestant churches have developed a tradition of an invitation following the service, or following the sermon, rather, with an invitation hymn. And here, I think in our bulletin, we call it more of a responsive hymn. a time when, after the sermon, anyone is invited to come forward to profess a decision or a commitment of faith. And it's a special time reserved for this public